They finally arrived. The applause echoed through the glass-walled conference hall while my name disappeared from the final presentation slide. A second earlier, it had been there. Now it wasn't. Instead, the screen displayed a single line. Chief Researcher, Dr. Victor Lang. Not mine. His. More than 300 researchers, investors, government officials, and reporters watched as Victor smiled with practiced humility. Our team devoted 7 years to this breakthrough. Our team. His eyes briefly met mine across the room. The smile widened. He knew I had seen the change. He also knew I wouldn't interrupt. A young reporter raised her hand. Dr. Lang, your adaptive molecular architecture has been called the biggest innovation of the decade. Who deserves the most credit? Victor laughed modestly. I've always believed leadership is about helping young researchers realize my vision. Scattered applause. Someone near me whispered loudly enough to hear. So that's Ethan Brooks. The assistant. I heard he's talented. Talented? If he were, his name would be on the patent. Laughter. I looked down at the conference badge hanging around my neck. Ethan Brooks. Senior research engineer. Not inventor. Not project leader. 7 years. 7 years of 18-hour days. 7 years of sleeping beside laboratory equipment. 7 years of fixing every crisis before anyone else noticed it existed. I reached into my briefcase and removed a plain white envelope. My resignation. Already signed. Already dated. Already approved by Human Resources 3 days ago. No one knew. Not Victor. Not the board. Not even the people who still occasionally called me their friend. The applause became louder. Victor lifted a crystal trophy handed to him by the Institute chairman. This award belongs to every member of the Institute. His words echoed through the room. The chairman leaned toward the microphone. We're proud to announce that Project Helix has officially entered international patent review under Dr. Lang's leadership. My phone vibrated. A message. Unknown number. Everything is ready. If today's presentation goes as expected, we'll begin tomorrow. I read it once. Locked the screen. Then quietly stood. The chair beside me scraped across the floor. Several people turned. Victor noticed. His eyebrows tightened for only a fraction of a second before he smiled again. I walked toward the exit. No dramatic speech. No accusation. No interruption. Behind me, Victor continued accepting congratulations. He believed he'd won. Outside, cold autumn air hit my face. The city stretched below the Institute's marble staircase. For the first time in years, I could hear traffic instead of laboratory ventilation systems. Footsteps rushed after me. Ethan. I didn't stop. Ethan, wait. Lena caught my arm before I reached the parking lot. She was the Institute's legal coordinator and one of the few people who still looked guilty whenever Victor took credit for someone else's work. You can't leave like this. I already did. You heard what he said. I did. He erased you. I noticed. Her expression shifted from anger to confusion. Then why didn't you fight? I gently pulled my sleeve free. Would he have listened? The board would. Would they? Silence answered. Because both of us already knew. The board had watched Victor erase names for years. As long as grants kept coming, nobody cared. Lena lowered her voice. I saw the patent submission. So did I. Your laboratory records disappeared. I know. They even changed the internal timestamps. I expected that. She stared at me. You expected all this? I expected exactly this. Her face slowly lost its color. Ethan, you should go back inside. What are you talking about? The celebration won't last long. Before she could ask another question, a black sedan rolled to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. A woman in a navy business suit exited. Elegant. Composed. Perhaps 40. She looked directly at me. Mr. Brooks. I nodded. Ms. Eleanor Shaw. Lena blinked. The CEO of Horizon Biotech. Eleanor smiled politely. I've been looking forward to meeting you in public. Lena looked between us. What is happening? Eleanor answered before I could. Mr. Brooks accepted our invitation last week. Lena frowned. But today's patent isn't the one we were interested in. I opened the car door. Lena grabbed my wrist one last time. Ethan. Her voice trembled. If you leave now. I know. You may never come back. I smiled. I wasn't planning to. The sedan pulled away. Through the rear window, the Institute grew smaller. 7 years. Reduced to a building disappearing behind traffic. Eleanor placed a sealed folder on the seat beside me. Your laboratory is ready. I looked at it, but didn't open it. And the transfer? Completed. The equipment? Delivered yesterday. She hesitated. Our board still doesn't understand why you insisted on giving them the prototype. I didn't give them the project. She looked at me curiously. No, I gave them exactly what they wanted. Outside the window, rain began falling. Light. Steady. Like the beginning of something inevitable. Back at the institute, the celebration had barely ended when Victor entered the executive conference room surrounded by board members. Champagne glasses clinked. The chairman laughed. This patent alone will double our valuation. Victor nodded confidently. It will only be the beginning. Someone knocked. The institute's intellectual property director entered carrying 3 folders. Dr. Lang. Victor smiled. Already bringing congratulations. The director didn't smile back. I need your signature regarding the complete patent documentation. Victor casually opened the folder, then stopped. His smile disappeared. What is this? The technical appendix. It isn't complete. No. The core algorithm is missing. So are the validation equations. Victor frowned. That's impossible. We checked every archive. They should be there. They aren't. Victor stood. Call Ethan. We already did. And he resigned. The room fell silent. What? He resigned 3 days ago. Victor laughed once. A dry, forced sound. Impossible. The chairman looked at human resources. Is this true? A nervous manager slowly nodded. He submitted everything earlier this week. Victor's confidence cracked for the first time. He can't resign. He already has. He can't take institute property. The IP director quietly pushed another document across the table. We're trying to determine whether it ever legally belonged to the institute. Victor's heartbeat suddenly felt much louder than the room around him. The silence inside the executive conference room became suffocating. Victor flipped through the documents with increasing speed, each page making less sense than the last. These laboratory notebooks. He muttered. Why are there gaps? The intellectual property director folded his hands. Because the original authenticated records aren't in our archive. Victor slammed the folder shut. They were. No, they had to be. The digital records exist, the director replied calmly. But the original inventor authentication files were never finalized. Victor turned sharply toward the chairman. Then we'll recreate them. Lena, who had quietly entered the room moments earlier, finally spoke. You can't. Every eye shifted toward her. Victor's voice hardened. Why not? Because inventor authentication requires the original author's biometric verification. I'll authorize an exception. There isn't one. Victor stepped closer. You handled the paperwork. I handled the paperwork you submitted. And it wasn't complete. The chairman's face darkened. Explain. Lena inhaled slowly. Dr. Lang instructed legal to delay inventor registration until after today's announcement. Victor interrupted immediately. For administrative convenience. She looked directly at him. No. Her voice remained steady. You said there would be fewer complications if Ethan's contribution stayed internal until international filings. Nobody spoke. The chairman stared at Victor. Is that true? Victor forced a smile. You're misunderstanding routine procedure. Before anyone could respond, another executive hurried inside carrying a tablet. Chairman, what now? We've received an inquiry from the International Patent Examination Office. Victor relaxed slightly. Perfect. They're moving quickly. The executive swallowed. They're asking why our filing references external ownership. The room froze. External ownership? Victor repeated. Yes. He grabbed the tablet. Across the screen appeared a formal notice. Primary patent ownership cannot be confirmed due to existing contractual disclosures filed by an independent research entity. Victor read it twice. Then a third time. His fingers tightened around the device. This is impossible. The chairman's expression grew colder. What independent entity? No idea. Victor looked toward Lena. You knew? She shook her head. I've never seen this notice. The intellectual property director adjusted his glasses. If this disclosure predates our filing. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Everyone understood. The patent could be challenged. Everything announced an hour earlier suddenly stood on unstable ground. Victor pulled out his phone. Ethan. No answer. He called again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. His breathing became uneven. He wouldn't dare. Meanwhile, I sat inside Horizon Biotech's temporary research facility. It didn't look impressive. The walls were plain. Most of the equipment had been purchased secondhand. The cafeteria was half the size of the Institute's coffee lounge. Yet the atmosphere felt strangely peaceful. Nobody glanced at me with suspicion. Nobody whispered about credit. Nobody waited for someone else's mistake. Eleanor handed me an access card. Laboratory 7. I examined it. Simple. No executive title. No ceremonial welcome. Just my name. She noticed my expression. Disappointed? I smiled faintly. No. We couldn't offer marble floors. I've never cared about floors. She laughed quietly. I suspected that. As we walked through the hallway, researchers stopped what they were doing. Not to applaud. Not to flatter. Just curious. One young engineer raised his hand awkwardly. Mr. Brooks? Yes. I read one of your old thermal stability papers during graduate school. I blinked. You did. It solved a problem in my thesis. He smiled sheepishly. Thank you. Such ordinary words. Yet they struck harder than every trophy hanging inside the Institute. Eleanor waited until he walked away. Recognition doesn't always arrive where you earned it. No. It usually arrives where someone finally bothers to look. She opened the laboratory door. Inside stood a prototype reactor. Incomplete. Silent. Waiting. Our board wanted your finished technology, she said. I refused. I know. They thought you were negotiating for more money. And I told them they were wrong. I ran my fingers across the polished steel casing. They still don't understand. What do you mean? They think the invention is the valuable part. She studied me carefully. Isn't it? No. I looked at the unfinished machine. The person who understands why it works is always worth more than the machine itself. Her eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You expected Victor to steal the project. I expected him to steal what he could see. And what couldn't he see? The years inside my head. A knock interrupted us. A technician entered carrying a secure package. This just arrived. Eleanor handed it to me. Inside lay a small encrypted drive. No label. No markings. Only a handwritten note. The mirror records remain untouched. Use them only if necessary. I folded the note without saying anything. Eleanor noticed. Mirror records? I placed the drive into my pocket. Insurance. For what? For the day they become desperate. Back at the Institute, Victor stood alone inside Laboratory 9. The benches were empty. Drawers had been searched. Servers copied. Whiteboards photographed. Yet every answer created two more questions. He stared at the prototype resting beneath a protective cover. It still works, he whispered. It has to. He ordered the technicians to begin demonstration testing. No one argued. Minutes later, warning lights flashed across the control panel. One alarm, then another. A senior engineer frowned. The calibration model is missing. Victor snapped back. Replace it. We don't know how. You built this system. The engineer hesitated. No, sir. He looked toward the empty workstation that had belonged to me. He did. Victor finally understood something that frightened him far more than resignation. He hadn't stolen a completed project. He had stolen something he didn't truly understand. And outside the laboratory windows, the rain continued falling without pause. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. By the fourth morning, every major business newspaper carried the same headline. The race for Project Helix enters a new phase. Only one article mentioned my resignation. A single paragraph. No photograph. No interview. No speculation. To the public, I was just another engineer who had quietly left one laboratory for another. That was exactly how I wanted it. You're trending. Eleanor slid a tablet across the conference table. I glanced at it. Not my name. Victor's. Television interviews. Magazine covers. Industry awards. He smiled confidently from every headline. Should I be offended? I asked. Eleanor smiled. You? They're calling him the father of Helix. You knew they would. I did. She leaned back. I still don't understand how calm you are. I looked out the window toward the gray skyline. When someone spends years pretending to build a house, they never learn to repair. You don't stop them from hanging the roof. She remained silent. Gravity eventually introduces itself. Laboratory 7 slowly came alive. Unlike the Institute, nobody demanded impossible deadlines. Nobody shouted. Researchers argued over equations instead of office politics. For the first time in years, disagreement felt productive. A young materials specialist named Aaron approached my workstation carrying 2 coffee cups. I've been trying to understand your reactor model. You shouldn't. He blinked. Shouldn't. You should understand the problem. He frowned. I don't follow. If you memorize my solution, you'll always need me. I rotated the unfinished reactor model toward him. But if you understand why the previous models failed. His eyes slowly widened. I'll eventually solve problems without you. I nodded. That's how laboratories survive. Aaron smiled. I've never heard a department head say that. I'm not interested in building followers. I handed him a marker. Let's start over. Across town, Victor was having a very different morning. Again, the prototype shut itself down. An engineer sighed. The thermal balance collapsed. Victor rubbed his temples. Restart. We've already restarted 6 times. Then 7. The room obeyed. Nobody argued. Nobody suggested another approach. Everyone simply waited for instructions. The machine failed again. This time, smoke curled from the primary chamber. One technician instinctively stepped backward. We're overheating. Victor slammed his fist onto the control desk. Why? Silence. Finally, senior engineer Malcolm spoke carefully. Because the equations don't explain how the adaptive corrections are generated. Victor glared. Then calculate them. We've tried. Try harder. Malcolm looked toward my empty workstation. Ethan never wrote them down. Victor froze. What do you mean? He solved them. And he solved them differently every time. Victor stared. That's impossible. No. Malcolm swallowed. It was just him. That afternoon, an emergency board meeting was called. The chairman entered with a thick folder. I've spoken with 3 investors. Victor remained confident. We'll demonstrate the reactor next month. The chairman ignored him. They're asking questions. What questions? Why every successful test occurred when Ethan Brooks supervised calibration. Victor forced a laugh. Correlation isn't proof. No. The chairman opened another document. But patterns deserve attention. Page after page. Maintenance reports. Internal emails. Shift schedules. Each one revealed the same thing. Whenever critical failures occurred, my employee ID appeared. Problem resolved. Whenever unexpected discoveries happened, my access card appeared. Whenever deadlines were somehow met, my security log showed overnight laboratory entry. Victor's smile slowly disappeared. He had never looked at the maintenance reports. He had only looked at the headlines. Late that evening, Lena knocked on my office door. She looked exhausted. You came. I wasn't sure I should. You already decided before knocking. She smiled weakly. I suppose I did. I offered her tea. She wrapped both hands around the warm cup without drinking. They're searching every server. I know. They think you stole company data. I didn't. I know. Silence settled comfortably between us. After a while she asked quietly, did you really leave everything behind? I looked around the modest laboratory. Does this look like everything? No. It looks like a beginning. She finally smiled. Then it disappeared again. Victor wants to sue you. For what? Theft. I expected that. You don't seem worried. I'm not. She reached into her bag. I shouldn't have this. She placed a flash drive onto the table. What is it? A copy of the surveillance archive. I didn't touch it. You took a tremendous risk. So did you. I resigned. You challenged people who never lose gracefully. I looked at the drive for several long seconds, then gently pushed it back. Keep it. She frowned. You don't want it. If I need evidence. I tapped my pocket where the encrypted drive rested. I already have stronger evidence. She stared at me. How much did you prepare? I answered honestly. Enough. That night, alone inside Laboratory 7, I finally unlocked the encrypted drive. The monitor illuminated the darkroom. Hundreds of folders appeared. Every version, every revision, every failed prototype, every signed laboratory notebook, every timestamp, every biometric verification, every encrypted author log. Nothing had been altered. Nothing had been erased. Everything existed exactly as it had happened. I closed the files again. Not yet. Truth was strongest when people finished lying first. The Institute announced an international demonstration. Victor insisted it would silence every rumor. Every television network accepted the invitation. Investors flew in from 6 countries. Government officials reserved front-row seats. Eleanor watched the broadcast schedule and shook her head. He's accelerating. He has to. Why? Because confidence is expensive. She looked at me. And fear. Fear charges interest. 3 days before the demonstration, Horizon's board gathered for its monthly strategy meeting. Unlike the Institute, nobody spoke about humiliating competitors. They discussed manufacturing capacity, regulatory approvals, safety testing, practical things. Finally, one director turned toward me. Mr. Brooks. Yes. If Victor's demonstration fails. He paused carefully. Should Horizon issue a public statement? I answered without hesitation. No. The room looked surprised. Why not? Because their failure isn't our achievement. Another director frowned. But the market will compare you. They're already comparing us. Then shouldn't we defend ourselves? I folded my hands. People listen differently after disappointment. Eleanor smiled almost imperceptibly. She understood. Truth forced upon someone feels like attack. Truth discovered personally feels like realization. Meanwhile, Victor wasn't sleeping. Coffee cups covered his office. Equations filled every whiteboard. Engineers came and went in exhausted silence. Malcolm entered carrying another technical report. Victor didn't even look up. Tell me something useful. Malcolm hesitated. I think. What? We're solving the wrong problem. Victor finally raised his head. What does that mean? The reactor isn't unstable. It keeps failing. Yes. But only after environmental adaptation begins. Victor stared. So perhaps adaptation isn't a feature. Victor frowned. What else would it be? Malcolm looked toward the reactor. Perhaps it's the foundation. The words hung heavily in the room. Victor slowly realized what Malcolm meant. If adaptation wasn't one module, then the entire architecture had been misunderstood. Everything built afterward, everything, rested on a false assumption. His stomach tightened. For the first time, he wondered whether he had ever understood Project Helix at all. Later that evening my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Ethan. Victor. His voice sounded tired. You've been difficult to reach. I haven't been hiding. I think we should talk. We are. A long silence followed. Finally he spoke. I may have underestimated your contribution. May have. Another pause. I'd like you to return. No. I'll make you co-director. No. Name your salary. I almost smiled. You still think this is about money? What else could it be? I looked through the laboratory window where Aaron and two junior researchers were laughing over an experiment that had just failed spectacularly. Nobody blamed anyone. They simply started discussing why. I answered quietly. Respect. Victor scoffed. You're throwing away your career over pride. No. I built my career. You worked under me. I worked despite you. His breathing became noticeably heavier. Ethan. What? If the demonstration succeeds? It won't. The words escaped before I realized I'd spoken them aloud. Victor went silent. How can you know that? Because I had designed every safeguard. Because I knew every missing equation. Because I understood every compromise hidden beneath the polished prototype. Instead, I simply said, You'll find out. I ended the call. Eleanor had apparently heard enough from the doorway. You warned him. I answered his question. You could have watched him walk into disaster. I still am. She studied me for several seconds. You're an unusual man. I've made enough noise for one lifetime. Outside, storm clouds gathered again above the city. Across town, technicians began loading the Helix prototype onto transport vehicles for the largest demonstration in the Institute's history. None of them noticed Malcolm quietly removing his security badge before leaving the laboratory. He placed it on Victor's desk without saying a word. Then he walked away. Victor returned an hour later, saw the badge, and felt a chill run through him. For the first time since taking credit for Project Helix, someone who knew the truth had chosen to leave instead of continue pretending. And the demonstration was now only 48 hours away. The exhibition hall shimmered beneath hundreds of spotlights. Rows of cameras pointed toward the circular stage where the Helix reactor stood beneath a polished glass enclosure. The Institute had spared no expense. Massive LED screens displayed animated molecules rotating through brilliant shades of blue and silver. A string quartet played softly near the entrance while executives greeted ministers, investors, and journalists with practiced smiles. To anyone walking in, it looked like history was about to be made. I watched the live broadcast from Laboratory 7. Aaron walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee before stopping behind me. They really went all out. They did. You don't seem nervous. I've already seen this machine at its best. And it isn't standing at its best today. He looked at me for a moment. You really aren't going to interfere. No. Even if everything collapses? I accepted the coffee. If someone refuses every warning. I took a quiet sip. The lesson belongs to them. Backstage, Victor adjusted his tie for the 5th time. His reflection smiled. His eyes did not. An assistant hurried over. Dr. Lang, we're live in 3 minutes. Has the calibration finished? Almost. Victor frowned. Almost. There were minor synchronization warnings. I told the engineering team to clear every warning. They did. Then why are there still warnings? The assistant hesitated. They disappear, then come back. Victor looked toward the control room through the glass wall. Technicians moved quickly between consoles. Nobody looked relaxed. He inhaled deeply. Everything had to work. Today wasn't just a demonstration. It was proof that Ethan had never mattered. It had to be. The chairman stepped onto the stage first. His confident smile filled every camera. Ladies and gentlemen. Applause erupted. Today marks the beginning of a new era. Another wave of applause. Victor followed him onto the stage to thunderous cheers. The reactor slowly rotated beneath its transparent enclosure. Journalists leaned forward. Government representatives whispered among themselves. The chairman raised his hand toward Victor. It is my honor to introduce the visionary behind Project Helix. The audience stood. Victor accepted the applause. He had imagined this moment for years. He bowed modestly before approaching the control console. Our technology represents countless hours of dedication. His speech flowed naturally. Confidence returned with every sentence. And today you will witness clean adaptive energy unlike anything the world has ever seen. He pressed the activation key. The reactor awakened. Blue rings illuminated one after another. Soft mechanical sounds echoed through the hall. The audience applauded again. Victor smiled. Phase 1. Successful. The reactor reached 20% output. 30. 40. Graphs climbed smoothly across the massive screens. Investors exchanged approving nods. Someone whispered, "It works." Victor finally relaxed. Then the first warning appeared. Adaptive balance pending. It vanished almost immediately. Victor ignored it. 50%. 60. Another warning. Environmental response delayed. A technician glanced uneasily toward Malcolm's empty workstation. Nobody stood there anymore. Victor continued speaking. Our adaptive architecture continuously analyzes. The sentence stopped. A loud metallic vibration echoed from inside the reactor. The audience fell silent. Victor laughed lightly. Minor resonance. The technicians didn't laugh. One engineer whispered urgently into his headset. Pressure differential increasing. Another replied. The compensation loop isn't responding. Victor kept smiling for the cameras. His palms had begun sweating. Inside Horizon's laboratory, nobody celebrated. Researchers simply watched. Aaron quietly asked, "Can they still recover?" "Yes." His eyes brightened. "They can, if they stop the demonstration immediately." "And will they?" I looked at Victor's image on the monitor. He was smiling harder than before. "No." The vibration intensified. Tiny cracks spread across one of the ceramic stabilizers. Only engineers noticed. Journalists continued taking photographs. The audience still believed everything was under control. Victor discreetly muted the warning alarm. He couldn't allow panic. Not now. Not with every investor watching. The chairman leaned closer. "Is everything all right?" Victor nodded without hesitation. "Perfectly." He pressed another command. The reactor climbed to 75% output. Several technicians exchanged horrified looks. One finally spoke aloud. "We shouldn't." Victor glared. "Continue." The technician swallowed. "Yes, doctor." No one challenged him again. Fear was louder than reason. The first loud crack echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Conversation stopped instantly. The reactor didn't explode. It simply stopped adapting. For 2 long seconds, absolute silence filled the room. Then warning lights flooded the stage in flashing red. Adaptive failure. Thermal instability. Automatic compensation offline. Victor's smile disappeared. What happened? The lead technician's fingers flew across his keyboard. "We've lost the correction model." It was working. It was never complete. Victor grabbed the microphone. Everyone remained calm. The audience wasn't panicking. Not yet. They were confused. The chairman stepped beside him. "Can you fix it?" Victor looked toward the control room. Nobody answered. Every engineer understood the same terrifying fact. They had memorized procedures. Only one person had ever understood why those procedures existed. And he wasn't there. The live broadcast continued. Television commentators tried to remain composed. "It appears," The team is experiencing a brief technical delay. Social media reacted much faster. Didn't Ethan Brooks resign? Why is the reactor failing now? Wasn't he the lead systems engineer? Questions multiplied every minute. Rumors traveled faster than official statements. My phone vibrated repeatedly. Journalists. Former colleagues. Unknown numbers. I answered none of them. Aaron looked surprised. They're all calling you. I know. Aren't you curious? No. Not even a little. I watched Victor speaking frantically with his engineers. They're writing the next chapter themselves. Back at the exhibition hall, the chairman's confidence had completely vanished. Shut it down. Victor hesitated. We can recover. Shut it down. We only need another calibration cycle. The lead engineer finally spoke with unusual firmness. There is no calibration cycle. Victor stared. What? Ethan never programmed one. What are you talking about? He performed it manually. The words landed like stones. The chairman turned sharply. Manually. The engineer nodded. Every public demonstration. Victor's face lost all color. Why wasn't that documented? The engineer looked down. He said he was still refining the process. No. Victor whispered. He would have written it. The engineer answered quietly. He tried. Victor looked up. What? He submitted 3 requests for extended testing. The chairman frowned. I never saw them. You wouldn't. They were rejected before reaching the board. Victor slowly remembered. Months earlier. 3 proposals. More testing. More validation. He had dismissed every one of them. We don't have time for perfection. Those had been his exact words. Now they echoed back at him with merciless clarity. Late that afternoon, every major financial network carried breaking news. Helix demonstration suspended after technical failure. The institute's stock value began falling before the press conference had even ended. Investors demanded explanations. Government funding was placed under immediate review. Meanwhile, Horizon Biotech's share price quietly rose. Not because we had said anything, but because the market suddenly remembered there had been another name attached to Project Helix. As evening settled over the city, Eleanor entered my office carrying a sealed envelope. It arrived by courier. I opened it. Inside was a formal notice. The International Patent Review Authority requests the presence of Mr. Ethan Brooks regarding inventor authentication and original development records. Eleanor looked at me. They finally asked. I folded the letter carefully. I expected they would. They're giving you an opportunity. No. I placed the envelope back on the desk. They're giving the truth an opportunity. Outside, rain finally stopped. For the first time in days, a faint ray of sunlight broke through the clouds and reflected across the laboratory windows. Far across the city, Victor sat alone in his dark office, surrounded by silent machines and unfinished equations. His phone rang. It was the chairman. He stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. The chairman spoke only one sentence. Tomorrow morning, the board wants every original document related to Project Helix. The line went dead. Victor slowly looked toward the locked filing cabinet, where he believed the last remaining secrets were hidden. He didn't yet know that the evidence he feared most had never been inside the institute at all. The boardroom was unusually quiet. No coffee. No casual conversation. No congratulations. Only thick folders lay neatly arranged before every director. Outside the glass walls, reporters crowded the institute's entrance. Camera flashes reflected against the polished marble floor like distant lightning. Inside, nobody looked at Victor. The chairman finally broke the silence. Bring him in. The door opened. 2 members of the legal department entered first. Behind them walked Lena, carrying 3 sealed evidence boxes. Victor frowned. What is all this? She didn't answer. She simply placed the boxes on the conference table. The chairman looked at Victor. You told this board every critical document was under institute control. They are. Lena quietly slid the first seal across the table. No. Victor's jaw tightened. The originals never entered the institute archive. He laughed once. They had to. They didn't. The intellectual property director unlocked the first box. Inside were photocopies of submission requests. Dozens of them. Each carried my signature. Each requested formal inventor registration. Each had been stamped. Returned. Pending. Delayed. Insufficient priority. The chairman slowly lifted one page after another. When were these submitted? Lena answered. Over the last 4 years. Victor immediately spoke. Administrative backlog. She met his eyes. No. You can't prove otherwise. I can. She opened the second evidence box. Inside were internal email records. Every rejected submission had been forwarded to Victor. Every recommendation from legal to finalize inventor recognition had received the same reply. Delay until commercialization. No external disclosure. Handle internally. The chairman looked up. You wrote these? Victor hesitated. They've been taken out of context. What context justifies suppressing inventor registration? Victor searched for an answer. None came. Across the city, I entered the International Patent Review Authority for the first time. No cameras waited outside. No reporters followed. The building was almost disappointingly ordinary. A receptionist greeted me politely before escorting me into a conference room where 3 patent examiners waited. An older woman adjusted her glasses. Mr. Brooks. I nodded. Thank you for coming. She folded her hands. We'd like to establish one thing. What is that? Who actually created Project Helix? I placed the encrypted drive on the table. I assumed that's why you invited me. One examiner looked at the drive. What's inside? The complete history. He frowned. The complete. Every experiment. Every revision. Every failure. The woman exchanged glances with her colleagues. You preserved all of it. I learned early that memory isn't enough. She leaned forward. Why didn't you release this when your name disappeared? I thought about Victor. About the conference. About the applause. Then answered quietly. Because evidence speaks more clearly after lies become public. No one interrupted. The room remained silent for several seconds. Finally, the senior examiner smiled faintly. That's unusually patient. I wasn't waiting for revenge. What were you waiting for? The right question. Back at the institute, Victor's confidence continued crumbling. The chairman pushed another folder toward him. Explain these laboratory access logs. Victor opened them. His heartbeat quickened. Every emergency repair. Every midnight laboratory entry. Every critical calibration. Every single one belonged to Ethan Brooks. The chairman's voice became noticeably colder. You repeatedly described Ethan as a supporting engineer. He was. Then why did every successful stabilization require his authorization? Victor looked toward Malcolm's empty chair. No answer came. The chairman continued. Where are your own calibration records? Victor slowly turned another page. Blank. Another. Blank. Another. Nothing. For years he had believed leadership meant standing in front of cameras, while others solved impossible problems behind him. Now paperwork was exposing what applause had hidden. The patent authority worked in silence. No dramatic accusations. No raised voices. Only facts. One file after another appeared on the projector. Time-stamped laboratory notebooks. Biometric signatures. Encrypted development logs. Prototype photographs. Video recordings from early testing. One examiner paused the footage. On the screen, a younger version of me adjusted an unstable reactor while explaining the adaptive correction model to a small engineering team. Victor wasn't present. The date appeared clearly in the corner, almost 3 years before the Institute's official announcement. Another examiner looked up. This predates every filing submitted by the Institute. Yes. He opened another folder. Employment contracts. Consulting agreements. Private research notes. Everything aligned perfectly. No contradictions. No missing pages. The senior examiner removed her glasses. I've rarely seen documentation this complete. I expected disputes. You expected someone would take credit. I expected someone would try. She nodded slowly. You prepared without accusing anyone. I prepared in case I needed to answer. The distinction mattered. She understood it immediately. By noon, the Institute's emergency press conference began. Victor stood behind the podium. Flashbulbs erupted across the room. A reporter spoke before he finished his opening statement. Did Ethan Brooks invent Project Helix? Victor maintained his composure. Project Helix was developed through teamwork. Another reporter stood. Then why has the International Patent Authority requested only Mr. Brooks? No comment. A third voice cut through the crowd. Did you suppress inventor registration? Victor's throat tightened. I reject that characterization. Documents suddenly appeared on several journalists' phones. Emails. Internal approval chains. Legal recommendations. Someone had leaked the board evidence. The room erupted. Are these authentic? Did you delay his recognition? Did you knowingly present yourself as the lead inventor? Questions came faster than answers. Victor stepped back from the podium. For years, He had controlled every narrative. Today, the narrative no longer belonged to him. At Horizon, Eleanor switched off the live broadcast. She looked at me. You could hold a press conference this afternoon. I could. You'd dominate every headline. I don't need headlines. She smiled. I thought you'd say that. A moment later, Aaron entered breathlessly. Mr. Brooks. What happened? The Institute's stock dropped another 18%. I simply nodded. He looked almost disappointed. Aren't you happy? I considered the question carefully. No. They ruined your career. They tried. And now they're paying for it. I looked toward the laboratory where younger researchers were testing their own designs. They're paying for their own choices. There was a difference. One that mattered. Late that evening, the patent authority released its preliminary statement. No dramatic language. No accusations. Only one carefully written sentence. Current evidence identifies Ethan Brooks as the original principal inventor of the adaptive architecture underlying Project Helix, pending final administrative confirmation. That single sentence spread across every major news outlet within an hour. Investors reacted immediately. Government agencies suspended all institute commercialization agreements until ownership questions were resolved. Universities began quietly withdrawing honorary invitations previously offered to Victor. Meanwhile, my phone remained silent. No celebration. No victory speech. Only one unexpected message appeared. From Malcolm. I should have spoken years ago. I won't stay silent anymore. I read it once before locking the screen. Outside, the city lights reflected across the river. For years I had believed recognition would feel like triumph. Instead, it felt strangely quiet. Like setting down a weight I had carried for too long. Across town, Victor sat alone in his office. His shelves were lined with awards. His desk overflowed with congratulatory letters from the past. None of them mattered anymore. A knock sounded on his office door. The chairman entered without waiting for permission. He placed a single envelope on the desk. Victor looked at it without opening it. What is it? The chairman answered calmly. The board's decision. Victor's hands trembled as he reached for the envelope. Victor held the envelope for nearly a minute before breaking the seal. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. He unfolded the letter. His eyes moved across the first paragraph, then stopped. He read it again. The words had not changed. Effective immediately, Dr. Victor Lang is suspended from all executive and research responsibilities pending completion of an independent investigation. His fingers tightened. No. The chairman remained standing. This decision was unanimous. Victor looked up. You've known me for 15 years. I have. You can't abandon me because of one misunderstanding. The chairman's expression remained unchanged. This isn't about one misunderstanding. It's politics. No. He tapped the stack of documents resting under his arm. It's documentation. Victor's breathing became uneven. I built this institute. The chairman quietly shook his head. You built its reputation. He paused. Someone else built its future. Without another word, he left. The office door closed with a soft click. For the first time in years, Victor was completely alone. The following Monday, Horizon Biotech felt unusually busy. Not because of celebration. Because people wanted to work. Engineers crowded around whiteboards. Chemists debated material compositions over breakfast. Interns rushed between laboratories carrying prototype components with contagious excitement. Nobody spoke about the institute. Nobody celebrated Victor's downfall. They were too busy building something new. Aaron entered my office carrying a folder. Morning. Morning. He placed the folder in front of me. The junior team finished their first independent stability model. I looked at the equations. They weren't perfect. Several assumptions were weak. One calculation would never survive real-world testing. Aaron watched my reaction nervously. Well, I picked up a red pen. Instead of correcting the equations, I circled one question mark a young researcher had written in the margin. What do you think this means? Aaron smiled. They weren't sure. They admitted it. Yes. Good. He looked confused. They're learning. He frowned. By making mistakes. By admitting them. There was a difference. One I wish someone had taught our previous laboratory years earlier. That afternoon, Eleanor invited me onto the rooftop terrace. The city looked different from there. Less chaotic. More distant. She handed me 2 cups of tea. No board meetings today. I noticed. No emergency interviews either. I noticed that too. She leaned against the railing. The patent authority called. I expected they would. They've completed verification. I waited. They're officially naming you principal inventor. The words settled quietly between us. For years I had imagined hearing them. In countless sleepless nights. After endless experiments. During every conference where someone else accepted applause meant for my work. Now they finally arrived. Unexpectedly. They didn't change anything inside me. Eleanor noticed. I thought you'd smile. I already knew. I mean emotionally. I looked across the skyline. The title doesn't create the work. No. It only catches up to it. She laughed softly. I suppose that's why you never chased recognition. I chased understanding. Later that evening my inbox flooded with invitations. Universities. International conferences. Research councils. Television interviews. Awards committees. Aaron walked into my office carrying another printed stack. They're offering keynote speeches. I glanced at the pile. So they are. Which one will you accept? I pushed the invitations aside. None this month. He blinked. None. We have prototypes to finish. He stared at me. You've waited years for this. I waited years to build. Not to speak. Across town, moving boxes lined Victor's office. Employees quietly removed books from shelves. Awards disappeared into cardboard cartons. Nobody made eye contact. The same corridors where executives once rushed to greet him now felt strangely empty. A maintenance worker entered. Excuse me. Victor looked up. We need your access card. For several seconds, he simply stared at it hanging around his neck. That little plastic card had opened every secure laboratory in the building. Every executive meeting. Every restricted archive. Every privilege. He unclipped it. Placed it in the worker's hand. The worker nodded politely. Thank you. Then walked away. The electronic lock on Victor's office door flashed red. Access revoked. Autumn slowly gave way to winter. The scandal faded from newspaper headlines. Another political controversy replaced it. Another corporate merger captured television attention. The world moved on. Science didn't. Laboratory 7 expanded into 2 additional research floors. Young engineers arrived from universities across the country. Some had read my papers. Others hadn't. It didn't matter. Curiosity mattered more than reputation. One snowy morning, Aaron entered carrying a cardboard box. I found these. Inside were my old notebooks from the institute. Corners worn. Pages stained with coffee. Margins crowded with hurried equations and impossible ideas. He smiled. You kept everything. I flipped through the first notebook. On one page, I'd written in exhausted handwriting. Remember why you're solving the problem, not who receives the applause. I hadn't remembered writing it. Aaron read the sentence silently. Did you really believe this back then? I smiled faintly. Some days. And the other days? I had to remind myself. He carefully closed the notebook. I think the team should see this. Why? They think you never doubted yourself. I laughed quietly. They've clearly never met a researcher. Weeks later, Horizon hosted its annual innovation forum. Unlike the Institute's grand ceremonies, the stage was simple. No orchestra, no giant banners. Just researchers presenting unfinished ideas. Some succeeded. Others failed publicly. Nobody applauded louder for success than for honest effort. When my turn came, I walked to the podium carrying only one notebook. No slides. No polished speeches. I looked across the audience. Young scientists. Experienced engineers. Students. Journalists. Even competitors. I've been asked many times how to protect an invention. The room became silent. I think that's the wrong question. Several people began taking notes. The better question is, I held up the old notebook. How to build a place where people don't need protection from each other. No dramatic pause followed. Only thoughtful silence. It felt enough. After the forum, I found Malcolm waiting near the exit. He looked older than I remembered. More tired. He extended his hand. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. I stayed quiet. You were afraid. I was. He looked down. I told myself I was protecting my family. And were you? I don't know anymore. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I shook his hand. The investigation needs honesty. It has it. I don't need revenge. I know. He smiled sadly. That's probably why you won. I gently corrected him. I didn't win. No. I just stopped losing myself. Malcolm stood silently for several seconds before nodding. Then he walked into the falling snow. That evening, I returned to the laboratory long after everyone else had gone home. The reactor prototype hummed softly beneath the observation lights. Not because it was perfect, because it was still being improved. I placed my old institute identification badge into a desk drawer, closed it, locked it. There was no anger attached to it anymore. Only memory. Outside, snow covered the city in quiet white. Inside, another experiment began. Not for recognition, not for revenge, simply because there were still unanswered questions worth pursuing. Spring arrived without announcement. The trees outside Horizon Biotech bloomed one quiet morning, and almost no one in the laboratory noticed. Deadlines were approaching. Experiments refused to cooperate. Coffee disappeared faster than anyone could brew it. Life had moved forward, exactly as it should. I was reviewing a set of reactor simulations when Eleanor knocked gently on my office door. "Do you have a minute?" "Always." She placed a sealed envelope on my desk. This came from the investigation committee. I looked at the familiar government seal. "They're finished." "So it seems." I opened it. The report was nearly 300 pages long. I didn't read all of it. I only searched for one section. Findings. The committee concluded that I had independently conceived, developed, and validated the adaptive architecture behind Project Helix. The report also confirmed that internal inventor recognition had been deliberately delayed despite repeated legal recommendations. No dramatic language. No emotional accusations. Only carefully documented facts. Facts had finally caught up with history. Eleanor studied my face. "Well, they finished their work. And yours?" I closed the report. "My work continues this afternoon." She laughed. "I had a feeling you'd say that." 3 days later, I received an invitation from the National Academy of Engineering. Not an award. A lecture. The topic they requested surprised me. Leadership in scientific innovation. Aaron looked over my shoulder. "You're accepting, right?" "I think so." "Good." He grinned. "They finally want to hear from the right person." I smiled. "I hope they want to hear the right lesson." The auditorium was full. Students filled the front rows. Professors sat quietly in the center. Industry leaders occupied the back. Many expected me to expose Victor publicly. Others expected a triumphant speech. Neither happened. I stepped behind the podium. No prepared script. No dramatic pauses. When people ask me what the greatest threat to science is, the audience became silent. They usually expect me to answer politics. A few nodded. Or funding. More nods. I gently shook my head. The greatest threat is believing that borrowed credit becomes earned truth. Pins stopped moving. People simply listened. You can borrow applause. You can borrow titles. You can even borrow someone else's discoveries. I paused. But understanding cannot be borrowed. The room remained perfectly still. It has to be built. When I finished, the applause lasted longer than any speech I had ever given. Yet what stayed with me wasn't the applause. It was the expressions. People were thinking. That mattered more. After the lecture, a young doctoral student hurried toward me. "Mr. Brooks?" "Yes. I almost left research last year." I waited. My supervisor kept taking credit for everything. His voice shook slightly. "Your story made me think maybe leaving isn't always losing." I smiled. "Sometimes walking away is how you protect what matters." He nodded slowly. "Thank you." As he disappeared into the crowd, I realized something unexpected. Perhaps the most valuable thing Project Helix would ever produce wasn't energy. Perhaps it was courage. 6 months later, the institute looked almost unfamiliar. A new chairman, a new ethics board, transparent inventor registration policies, independent review committees. Several laboratories had been renamed after pioneering researchers who had never been properly acknowledged during their careers. One afternoon, I received another invitation. This one surprised me even more. The institute wanted me to visit. Not as an employee, not as a consultant, as a guest. Aaron looked at the letter. "Will you go?" I folded it carefully. "Yes." "Really? There are people there who had nothing to do with what happened." The building felt smaller than I remembered. Or perhaps I had simply stopped carrying its weight. Young researchers moved through the hallways, discussing experiments with the same excitement I once had. None of them recognized me immediately. I preferred it that way. The new chairman greeted me near the entrance. "Mr. Brooks." "Chairman, I owe you an apology." "You don't." "We do." He looked around the atrium. This institution forgot what it existed for. I followed his gaze. Students. Scientists. Ideas. Not egos. I hope you remember now. So do I. Before leaving, I walked past Laboratory 9. The room had been completely renovated. New equipment, new workstations, new faces. Only one thing remained. My old workstation. The desk had been restored instead of replaced. A small brass plaque rested on its surface. Innovation belongs to those who pursue truth before recognition. No name, just the words. I smiled. That was enough. Outside, the afternoon sun warmed the stone steps where I had once walked away carrying nothing but a resignation letter. I stood there for a long moment, not reliving the past, simply acknowledging it. My phone buzzed. Aaron, where are you? Outside. The prototype passed every safety test. I looked toward the skyline. Congratulations. No. He laughed. Congratulations to all of us. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. For years, I believed silence meant surrender. I had been wrong. Silence had given arrogance enough room to reveal itself. I hadn't destroyed anyone. I had simply stopped protecting people from the consequences of their own choices. In the end, the project they tried to steal became the mirror that reflected who everyone truly was. Some saw ambition. Some saw fear. Some saw integrity. As for me, I no longer measured success by whose name appeared on a stage. I measured it by whether the next generation would inherit a better place to create than the one I had left behind. I turned away from the Institute one final time. Not because I was escaping it, because I no longer belonged to my past. Ahead of me waited another laboratory, another impossible question, another beginning. And this time, that was more than enough.